my name is Jeff Royer. My wife and I are the owners of Wild Birds Unlimited over at the Avenue, right next to Dick's Sporting Goods. If you haven't had the pleasure of visiting our business there yet, highly encourage you to do so. Our number one passion by far is our local birds, especially our backyard birds. And we really pride ourselves on helping the conservation efforts of our backyard birds, meaning high quality, fresh foods from U.S. farmers, feeders, bird baths, houses, all those things that support our local bird habitat, especially as their numbers have been dwindling through the past decades. So we're very, very focused on helping the conservation efforts of birds. Secondary to that, but also a passion of ours, is other pollinators. And one of those other pollinators that's kind of near and dear to me is the little brown bat. The little brown bat is in fact a very prolific pollinator, especially when it comes to fruit trees and orchards and so forth. They do an outstanding job of pollinating. And it's such an awesome little bat, completely harmless to us. It's on the brink of being endangered, even though it's our most common bat here in Tennessee, to a few things that I'll mention in the presentation today. Just an awesome little mammal, and I want to focus specifically on the little brown bat. There are over 1,000 bat species in the world, and this is just one of those, and they all are kind of different, but we'll focus on this little guy. So there are a couple photos. The one on the left indicates the close-up. The bats, typically in their cavern type setting, is they're hanging upside down with their nose and their hand membranes there. And there's a typical colony type of setting that you would see where there's dozens or maybe even hundreds together. Typically here in Rutherford County in particular, since we have so many limestone outcroppings and caverns, that would be a normal habitat for them, especially as they're hibernating through the winter months. They are a member of the Myotis family of bats, the little micro mouse-eared bats. They have cute little ears, and that's one of the physical characteristics that define them as part of the Myotis family. A couple of things I want to get out of the way first of all before we get a little deeper into talking about the little brown bat is bats. There are so many very wrong pieces of information out there, especially when it comes to our little brown bat. And so I want to real quick dispel some of that. People think bats, they bite people, they do all this crazy stuff. The vast, vast, vast majority of bats do nothing whatsoever. So first of all, people say, well, they carry rabies. You're more likely to get rabies from many other mammals that exist in the wild setting. The Tennessee Wildlife Federation did a study on the little brown bat years ago, and they found that less than 1 in 200 of them had rabies. That's less than 0.5%. And in that case, when they do have it, because they're such a small little sensitive bat to these things, if they would contract it, they'd very quickly, it would be fatal to them. So rabies are a non-issue with the little brown bat. That is complete misinformation. And then you hear, they're blind as a bat. Well, not the little brown bat. They actually see quite well. Many times when they're seeking their habitat and so forth, whether it be specific pieces of bark that they want to take shelter on a tree, or if you've got a bat box up, finding that, locating that, they actually see quite well. So another wrong piece of information. They're not dangerous to humans. Obviously, if you want to go out and try and capture one in your bare hands, so forth, yeah, it's probably going to react a little bit to that, and it might nip you. I mean, most wild creatures should if you do that with them. They don't come after you. They don't bite humans. They're not blood-sucking. And in fact, the other thing you hear about, oh, bat poop, it's terrible. It's no worse than your dog's poo. In fact, if you touch your dog's poo, you're just as well off here. And in fact, bat guano is actually an outstanding fertilizer, which in many cases, other species, not the little brown bat, that's not much guano, But in the bigger bat species, like out in Texas and New Mexico, some places, some of that guano is actually mined for fertilizer. They don't bite you, they're not after blood, they're 100% insectivores. In fact, of the over 1,000 species of bats in the world, there's only 3 that are considered a vampire bat, and they're not even the more common bats in the world. So lots of really horrible, bad misinformation when it comes to bats. One of the other things I love about the little brown bat, the 3 main things they eat are mosquitoes, moths, and mayflies. And I'm like, you can have those, you know, especially mosquitoes. That is one of their number 1 food sources. In fact, people that tend to have bat colonies, especially bat nurseries for the moms, which I'll talk about in a minute, their incidence of mosquitoes is very, very small, very small. Okay, and they're not excessive. Oh yeah, there's billions of bats, whatever. Well, if you add all the species together, and those 1,000 and so forth, of course, that's a pretty good population of bats. But with the little brown bat, this little small kind of delicate guy, their numbers are decreasing, even though, like I said, they still are our number 1 bat here in Tennessee. And you know, because of this bad reputation, it's not the number 1 thing people say when they're going to go, I'm going to go out and help nature. I'm going to help bats, you know, right? It doesn't tend to have the conservation efforts associated with it, other than places like Indiana State University, who are amazing people that have a bat conservatory department there. So a lot of bad stuff there, misinformation that I think I want to get out of the way right away. So it's a wonderful little mammal that we have all around us here. They're a tiny little guy. And the second thing I want to say is they're the only mammal that can fly. To fly, I was actually originally an engineer. To fly, you must be able to create your own lift. A bat can create its own lift. No, a flying squirrel cannot. It glides, etc., etc. So it's the only mammal that can actually fly and create its own lift. It's a little guy. From snout to tail, about 3 to 4 inches. About like that there. And when it opens its wings up, ooh, it's a whole 8 inches or so from wingtip to wingtip. So they're a little guy, just about 1/2 ounce for a full-grown male or female. And then the really cool thing about them is, and you can see that in a couple of the pics there, is that they do have fingers. They're called fingers. And there's that membrane between them, and that's how they take that out, and that's how they fly, is with that membrane that they've got between those very long fingers. And that's also how they catch insects. They'll take those, if you've ever seen them up close, or you can watch nature videos even. It's a little tough to see them up close with our binoculars, especially when it's dusk, right? Unless you got some good nighttime vision, is they will come and then they'll kind of swoop those insects in. They use that. They kind of, their echolocation, which I'll talk about, gets them close, and then they'll sweep them in close so then they can eat them. So it's been determined that an adult little brown bat can eat up to 500 insects per night. Wouldn't that be awesome if 95% of that was mosquitoes? Yes. Right? Let's see, I've got a bat colony, I've got 20 bats in there, each eating 400 mosquitoes. That's thousands a night. That's pretty awesome. And one of the cool things about it is their hunting height. When they come out at dusk and into the evening, their typical hunting height is around 10 to 20 feet. Well, that just so happens to be that ideal height for a lot of our orchards' fruit trees. So guess what they're doing? They're stopping, they're resting, they're landing, they're pollinating and so forth. So they're excellent at pollinating these fruit trees as they go about their business. So where do they roost? So obviously at night, they're out and about, they're hunting, they got a voracious habitat, they're always active. Imagine when we're awake, we're always running at full speed, right? We're gonna be pretty hungry. That's a bat, out flying all the time, right? So it's hungry. During the daytime, when it's not out and about, it's either gonna roost in trees. And what I love about the little brown bat is it's small enough, it can, at 3 or 4 inches, it can tuck itself into the layers of the large bark types of trees. So if you've got those on your trees, not really the extension branches, but the boughs, the big main ones that come off your tree trunks and so forth, they'll tend to nestle in there. So that's a habitat for them. Or obviously a bat house. We've had tremendous success, our customers, with having bat colonies in one of our bat houses, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Because they're out and about here, inhabiting your properties and so forth from spring to about fall before they go back into that hibernation state. And that hibernation state's really, really cool. We have an awesome environment here in Rutherford County because, as we all know, we got a lot of limestone, right? You know, just try digging in your yard, right? You know, oh, limestone, limestone, limestone. There are over 140 certified caves and caverns in Rutherford County, and that doesn't even count all the little outcroppings and those that haven't been certified and so forth. And those are the perfect habitat for them when they go into that hibernation. So we really have an ideal habitat for them here in Rutherford County. One cool fact, they have a torpor state. Torpor state, people say, oh, they go into hibernation, you know, they go into a coma. Well, it's not a coma. It's a torpor state where they have the ability to regulate their body's metabolism and their heart rates down to a very, very low level. This helps them to conserve that energy so they can survive during these long periods of hibernation during their torpor state. From typically 200 beats a minute, I mean, this is a fast heart beating bat, just like many of our smaller songbirds. And in that winter time, go down to about 20 a minute. And they'll really slow that metabolism. So that fat reserve that they've built up by fall, then they can live off of that while they're in their hibernation and drop their body temperature to as low as 36 degrees, just above freezing temperature. So amazing little guy. And they stick around here. No, they don't go to Florida. They typically, their hibernation is within about 30 miles of where their normal spring to fall habitat is. So here's part of the other issue with the conservation efforts is these aren't, the little brown bat isn't like a lot of mammals that, you know, out comes a litter of 8 or 10 or whatever is depending on the type of species. With the little brown bat, the female only has 1 pup per year. So that's it. That's the one shot. She's gonna have 1. And then I gotta tell you about this amazing, okay, I'm gonna go into biology a little bit here, but this is amazing to me. So in their breeding cycle, what happens is just before hibernation is actually their mating season. That is when a female will typically become impregnated with sperm by a male, but what happens is she houses that in her body, goes into her hibernative state, and then she does not ovulate until spring. So that ovulation and that actual pregnancy period isn't even till the spring. But because of that metabolism reduction, so forth, she can maintain that in her in a healthy way. And then she'll actually be, even though she was deposited on in the fall, she will not have that pup until late spring to early summer, which is amazing. It's an incredibly unique ovulation process that occurs with the little brown bat. Typically around here, that 1 pup will be born somewhere in May to July. Once that offspring, they're called pups, that 1 pup that stays with her is born. It'll fly at about 3 to 4 weeks typically, and then she'll wean it off by 6 weeks, and that's when it's also learning to go out and hunt. She'll take it with her when they go out hunting at the dusk time frame and so forth, and teach it to hunt its own insects and so forth. And it'll learn that through the summer before venturing out onto its own. It's estimated, of course you hear these things always on Google, there was one that lived to be 25 years. Well, of course there's always exceptions to things, but typically out in the wild, you know, you can think little brown bats maybe 5 to 10 years or so. Most of us are familiar with this echolocation. This is amazing, right? So what they're doing is they're emitting an extremely high frequency pitch sound, right? They're emitting that out. We can't hear that. Our ears can't. They're bouncing that off of, as they're flying, they're bouncing that off of their potential prey plus other things so they don't run into things and so forth. And that will help them determine the location of the insect they're after and also the size of it. So that echolocation back to them will tell that. And that's basically how, because it's dark, right? So they have that amazing ability to use echolocation to find their prey. So, but the number one reason that they're having problems is this white nose syndrome. So what happens is it's a fungal type of occurrence. It literally looks like a white fuzz on their face and can be into their insides and so forth when this occurs. And this has been the number one thing that has reduced the population of the little brown bat significantly. And we obviously can help as humans. I know people get curious here about, yeah, there's this large bat population hibernating in this cavern and people want to go in there and so forth, and I understand that. But the thing is, if we interrupt them from the torpor state, what do? They wake, they're spooked, they start breathing really fast, they start inhaling the potential fungal spores that are around them, and that increases the frequency chance significantly that they can get this white nose syndrome. So it's very important that they be allowed to do their hibernation in peace, breathing very, very occasionally, right? It's common sense, breathing very occasionally as opposed to being spooked and right, and inhaling those fungal spores, because it's very deadly to them. And if you ever wanted to know, there are scientists out there that studied bats, and they're called chiropterologists. Everybody say that? Chiropterologist. Yep, there you go. Yep, that's an actual bat scientist. They exist in the world, and they're focused on the conservation of bats. I want to talk a bit about bat houses because, like I said at the beginning, Joanne and I are all about how can we do little things to help, right? It's easy for people to say, well, someone else needs to do this, someone needs to do that, they need to stop this. Well, there's all little things we can all do. And a bat house is one of those ways. We have lots of customers that have tremendous success with this. It takes some patience, but we can put up a bat house. What's really cool about with the little brown bat is that the females are very social with each other. The dudes not so much. The guys, they hang out. They want to be in their bachelor pad doing their own thing. But the moms really want to have a colony, especially when they're all pregnant and so forth and going to have their pups. So the most success you can have is if you put a bat house up and the pregnant moms will form a colony in there. So, a house like this is a certified bat house. It needs to be certain dimensions and so forth. Dozens of mommy bats can inhabit this in spring to summer. And if they each have a pup, well, that's simple math, right? I mean, we've now doubled the bats that are in that environment. So that can be a great way to help the conservation efforts of bats, help the moms who like to be for safety and so forth together as a colony, be together in here. The females will typically only use this from that spring nursing time into fall. Their pups may still be with them at that point, or they may have strayed off. And at that point, they're going to go into hibernation. Sometimes we find, due to our temperate climate here in Tennessee, that some of the males, they will tough it out, or they will sometimes stay in here and use it as a little bachelor pad and so forth. But typically spring to fall is the real way that this bat house is beneficial. And I like to think of this as a way, drawing it back to the birds as well, is that this assists in the conservation effort of bats, right? So then if you draw bats around and they're consuming the mosquitoes and things of that sort, guess what? People in all these yards with this grass and spraying these chemicals all over the place and everything, they're not using that as much, so therefore the birds are also staying healthier. And that's something Joanne and I are very passionate about, because all these poisons, If we don't think these poisons we're spraying for insects and weeds and stuff like that aren't harmful to the birds, we're kidding ourselves. Those things are not good for our birds. So it's all kind of, what's the word, symbiotic? Because it kind of works together in nature in our yard. I got a closer up picture here. There's that, and the dimensions are important. I know some people around here love to word work, and that's awesome. If you're going to make a bat house, please look up the certified dimensions and characteristics of a bat house. Don't go nailing some wood together and sticking it up there and thinking you're doing good for the environment. For a few reasons. Number one, this all needs to be rough cut on the inside, right? Especially those pups, they need to be able to hold on. Their grip isn't great, right? So they have that little pup, guess what? If it can't fly yet, doesn't have that rough surface, it falls, goes to the ground, that one chance at a pup that year is gone. So that rough cut or a mesh on the inside is important. This dimension of the opening right here is very, very important. This needs to be 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch right there. If it's smaller than 1 inch, the adults can't really squeeze in or out, so it doesn't do you any good. If it's larger than 1 1/4 inch, we have so many predators here in Tennessee that come into that dimension, whether it's black rat snakes, whether it's squirrels, whether it's you name it, right? We just introduce the opportunity for predators to come in and harm those bats, especially the pups, if the pups are in there. Needs to have ventilation, right? Because it gets pretty hot, right? If you got the front of that box pointed west, which we don't recommend, we recommend pointing the box if you're going to mount one more easterly, because right, our August sun beating in there in the afternoon, that's when they're trying to sleep. That's well over 100 degrees, and that can be fatal to the pups. All right, if you're interested in putting a bat house up, I mentioned some of the dimensions there. We want to make sure it's at least 10 feet off the ground, because what do? I mean, this may seem like common sense, not to others. They're holding on the inside. They crawl down to that panel right here, and do they fly? Do they launch off of here? No, they let go. They let go, and then they fly. Right? So we got to give them that ability to, before they hit something on the ground or have an obstruction, be able to fly away. 15 feet is our recommendation if you're going to mount one. Keep that 10 feet clearance front and below, right? We don't want them to hit an obstruction, right? Or have a cat waiting down there that kills them or something like that. So those dimensions are important. We can mount on a pole. You can mount on a building or a tree. You're going to have a little bit more predator risk there, right? But up in the eaves of, especially if you got like a 2-level pole barn or anything like that, that can be a good setting. And if you do go on the tree, we got to get them that sun, right? That's how they keep warm, right? So if you got a big, beautiful oak tree and you stick that all up in those big branches right there, you didn't help them at all, right? Because that's just too cool. They need to be able to get some sun, so you'd have to clear some of those branches out. I mentioned about not facing it directly westerly. That's a little too hot for them. And then, of course, the water source is important. Now, this doesn't mean I've got my own built-in pond or, you know, I'm backed right up to the river or things like that. Even retention and so forth is good, because obviously around that water source, that's going to be a prime hunting ground for them. And they're going to be more likely to adopt the box if there's some sort of water source nearby. And this is the part most of us human beings do not like to deal with, and that's the patience. They're going to decide whether they move in. There's nothing you can do to this box, no coloring, no things you can put on it, no whatever. They're going to decide whether they adopt you or not. And please don't put it right under the light of a lamppost. Not a good idea. So those are some tips on bat houses. I don't know if this picture shows up very well, but isn't this cute? So this is actually a triple chamber bat house that we offer. And it's got the added grid in there so that they can really, really grip onto that. This is looking up this way. into there, and you can see, look at those cute little faces. Look at them hanging right there. They're cute little guys. They're hanging up there. This is probably a pic, I didn't take it, but this is probably a pic during the day when they're hanging out in there, and then they're gonna come out and hunt for the evening. And then of course the other suggestion I always like to give, and you guys know this, but sometimes I do this presentation with school children as well. I'm going to Google and see, and I'm going to decide I believe in that first thing that comes up on my Google hit when it comes searching about bats. Let's not do that, please. There's a lot of wrong information out there. There is an organization for bat conservation. It's sponsored by Wild Birds Unlimited and Partial. That's where we get our dimensions and information for our bat boxes and so forth and so on. And of course, Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. They'll be up to date with some of the things that are recent in terms of the information of Tennessee that will very likely be different than it would be in, you know, Florida or Indiana or California or Texas or someplace like that. But so as you can see, I mean, the little brown bat, it's a awesome little mammal. You know, can be a little more informed about them if you want to do part of the conservation effort, if you have the property to do so, and so forth. To have a bat box up, that's great. But yeah, that's the little brown bat.